Hi, this is Patrick with Trusty Huckster Mercantile, and this is my first What's Sold on Etsy video. This will cover from October 6th to November 6th, the first month of my Etsy store. So I launched Trusty Huckster Mercantile on October 6th, and in the first week, I made my first sale, and in the first month, I made 8 sales. So since I just launched my YouTube channel, I wanted to go ahead and do a quick overview of my first month and cover the 8 items that I sold in that first month. So in the first month, in the first week, I sold this cowrie shell napkin ring collection. This was a set of 14 rings, and I picked these up for $3 on a trip. It was in a Goodwill, and it was on one of my road trips through Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska area. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly where these came, but I do remember it was exactly $3 and came in a nice little gift box from Marshall Fields. And they were very heavily covered in packing tape. So when I opened it up, it totally destroyed the little box. But they're in excellent condition. And doing a little bit of research on these items, they sell fairly regularly, which somewhat surprised me. But they don't typically sell in such a large set. This was a set of 14. So I probably underpriced them, but again, my philosophy is I wanted to turn things. I only had $3 in them, and I really wasn't sure if a set of 14 was necessarily super attractive, because is that something people would normally buy in such a high quantity? I considered splitting it between maybe doing a set of 8 and a set of 6, but I just wanted to get rid of them. It was, again, trying to turn this, make some money, and move on and buy something else. So I was able to do that. I sold these for $25. Now, that did include shipping. And again, using the philosophy of Jeffrey at Real Nifty Vintage, I have launched my shop, and in the first month, 100% of the items I had in the store were all at free shipping. I have more recently started adding a couple smaller priced items just to flesh out my store and see how they do. Following that little promotion where if you buy $35 from my shop, then you get free shipping. So I did that for some of the less expensive items. For all of these that I'm covering, we did include shipping. This was not a particularly large or heavy box, so I think the shipping ended up being somewhere in the $6 or $7 range. So I still netted 15 to 20 bucks, which made me more than happy for my first sale within my first week. The second item took another 6 days after that. So after the first week, kind of was starting to wonder if I was going to make a 1 per week sale. I ended up selling this Laughlin art china spoon holder. Now, this was a piece that when I picked it up, it was actually another Goodwill. I think it might have been at the same haul as the one I picked up the napkin rings. This was actually in the wood section. And when I saw it at a glance, I thought it was wood until I picked it up. And then it was very clearly porcelain. The piece itself has this beautiful patina, and doing some research found it was called the Currants, Currants pattern. And I found, I believe it was on Pinterest, an old newspaper advertising that actually showed the entire collection that was available in this pattern. And one of the items was this little spoon holder. It also came in a larger size. I wasn't sure this was a particularly utilitarian piece or how collectible it would be. It just basically could have been a dresser set for however people wanted to use it. It was a nice little size, and I just liked the looks of it. So I picked it up. It was $1.99. Figured I really couldn't go wrong. And some of the Laughlin art china pieces, which this was very clearly marked, Laughlin art china, were selling for really big money. But that tended to be some of the nicer pieces and more popular pieces, dinner plates, things like that, and sets. So this one I ended up pricing at a fairly reasonable price. Again, considering I only had $2 in it. And it wasn't particularly heavy, wasn't particularly large, and it was going to be easy to ship. So I sold it for $29. It actually sold less than 24 hours from the time I listed it. I want to say it sold closer to maybe 12 hours. So the gentleman who purchased it communicated with me during the process and said that this is a collection that he actually already has, and he wanted to add this piece to his collection. So he probably had an alert or something along those lines set up. And picked that up, got that to him, very well packaged, and he was very happy. And think he gave me. I think the napkin rings ended up being my first review, and then he also gave me a very favorable review. So that was also kind of nice to see those reviews coming in. Also worth noting, I mentioned this sold within 24 hours of listing because I was still continuing to list. So when I first launched on October 6th, I probably had about 40 items, and then slowly but surely I was adding more. Currently, I've got 158 active. So I want to get closer to the 250 range, but slowly but surely. So it did get listed and got sold right away. The Rookwood piece also ended up selling. Didn't take too long to sell, but that was actually a difficult piece for me to try and figure out how to sell it because it was damaged. It's a beautiful piece, and to sit on the shelf, it would look perfect. But anybody that actually inspected it would see very clearly it was damaged. But it is a piece of Rookwood pottery. I'd never owned or held a piece of Rookwood before. I find it beautiful. It, based on the flame mark, there was no number underneath it, so it dated to exactly 1900, which I don't know if that made it any extra special, but it made it somewhat specific in its dating. So it was definitely something that needed to find another home. It was a single piece out of a pair, so it was a single bookend. This colorway was getting some pretty decent sold numbers as a pair. So I not only didn't have a pair, but the one piece I had was damaged. So I talked to some of my friends who actually have their own Etsy stores and been doing this for much longer. And they just said, look, sell it for a reasonable discount, make it very clear that it is damaged so somebody doesn't get it and be surprised by what they're getting. So all of these photographs were taken very great care to make sure you could see exactly what was wrong with it. And I ended up selling it for $39. The shipping on this was a little bit more because it's very heavy. It wasn't a particularly large box, but it was a somewhat heavy box. So the shipping was probably somewhere in the $10 range. But it was still, so I sold it for $29. I had $6 into it, and I was thrilled for it to go to someplace and hopefully is sitting on a shelf right now because it was a beautiful piece, and I was glad to see that it was going to go to a good home. The next item I picked up was a piece of chalkware from Marwa Industries. Now this one was one, again, this was one of my trips through Iowa and Nebraska. I found this little quirky independent thrift store that I had already finished my appointments for the day. I was heading to the hotel, and I just Googled, where some vintage stores were, and this was one that came up. So I got in there. I think I want to say they closed at like 6 or 7. And so I got there not too long before they closed, and I so wish I had more time because that day they were having a 50% off everything in the store, and they had some great stuff that was already at great prices. And this beautiful chalkware bust was only marked at $3, and I got her for $1.50. So I picked her up. She actually had a friend, but the friend, as chalkware tends to happen to chalkware, was fairly heavily damaged. This one did have a little bit of damage, which I was, again, very, very specific in being able to photograph. But the way she sits, you couldn't really see the damage. So it was one of those cases that it wasn't obvious, but I did disclose it because I didn't want anyone to get it and be surprised. It went to a woman whose parents had received a similar Marwa Industries bust for their wedding, and so she was now trying to build up the collection, and she was very happy to get it. What I'll note on this is this was one of my learning curves on photographing. I had this lovely series of photos that took all the different sides, was very clear, and had a very good representation of her skin color. And then I tried to get the angled shot to show the damage and the imprint, and I did not realize that the white balance had changed when I took the photo. So it happens. It's something I'm trying to be more aware of, but by the time I noticed it had happened, I'd already wrapped her up, labeled her, put her into storage, ready for sale, and I didn't want to dig her back out. So I figured if it hadn't sold, I would have eventually done that. Luckily, the photos were a good enough representation, and she already was familiar with the pieces that she accepted it without having any issues. She didn't even ask which one was the correct coloration. But so that one did end up going again. That one sold for $25. Shipping, again, relatively more expensive than some of the others. It still was probably $10 or $12 because she was a little bit heavy, and I wanted her very well packaged so she didn't get any more damage. But with $1.50 into her, I was super content at making that sale. Okay, the next item I sold was this platter. It was actually one of the first pieces I ever sourced. It was at a Goodwill locally here in the western suburbs of Chicago. It was at the very bottom shelf and the very back of the shelf. It was literally coated in dust bunnies and dirt and dust and everything. It clearly had made it through several cycles of clearing for the bins because people were too lazy to dig into the back of that shelf. So I pulled this thing out and I loved it. I didn't even know what it was, but it was $3.99, and just the appearance of it, there was something, heck, if I couldn't sell it, I'd use it. So I brought it home and did a little bit of digging and discovered that it was a piece of May and Viv Hamilton pottery from Vernon Kilns. So doing a little bit of digging on Worth Point and a couple other general searches, I discovered I couldn't find any histories for this white color, but there was a blue one on First Dibs that was over $600, which was still for sale, obviously, because that's an insane price. And other colors were selling, I won't say fairly regularly, but there was a decent history of about a half a dozen selling over the last few years of anywhere from $125 to $250. So this was one of those cases that, again, there was a little bit of damage. This is something that I chalk up to a lesson. I made this worse. I picked up the piece before I realized what its value was. I was trying to clean it because, as I said, it was pretty gunky. And I had seen that there was this little bit of a crease in the glaze. It wasn't a chip. It's literally just in the glaze. And I was pulled out some barkeeper's friend. I was trying to work with it, but I ended up getting water underneath it, and suddenly I discolored the entire. It made it look worse than it was before I started cleaning it. So I took that into consideration when I priced it. I ended up pricing it for $95 and sold it within a couple of days, and again to an individual who is a collector of specifically this pattern. It's a rippled pattern from Hamilton Pottery, and it did need to go in a fairly sizable box, but very luckily he actually lived in Chicago, so my cost for shipping on this was only, I think it was $13 priority mail, because I definitely wanted to get it insured. And so it's selling it for $95, and I had $4 into it. I was pretty happy with this as my kind of first super successful sale. Another piece that I picked up, this was in the northern suburbs. I was visiting some libraries. I sell to libraries. I was visiting some libraries in the North Shore, and I want to say this was either in Niles or in Skokie at a Goodwill, and it was in a large, tall box that once held a canister set, a modern stainless steel canister set. Very nicely wedged into it was this East German Christmas candle spinner. I never did quite figure out what it was called. It's got a Nativity, so there are a couple different. One was a German word that I didn't write down. I had a fun time trying to figure out the keywords for this one, but it was in excellent condition. There was a little bit of damage. One of the little candle holders had fallen off of the pedestal, and the little corner piece had broken off that held in the fence, and there was also a little ball that is supposed to be on there, which you can kind of see in these pictures, and a couple of the balls were missing. So again, I was very full disclosure that there was damage. I then repaired that damage and showed this is how I repaired it, but that the ball was still missing. There wasn't anything I could do about that. So again, I wasn't 100% sure what to sell it for because it was going to be expensive to ship, and it was East German, which I wasn't sure. I couldn't find a lot of examples of that. So I felt it might be more valuable. This was probably the first case where I underestimated how much it was going to cost me to ship. So I sold it for $49. It cost me $6.99. So the price-wise, I still have a decent amount of money. But I did end up spending $20 in shipping. So I was a little caught off guard how much it was. So, but I still made $29 from a $7 investment. So it's not like I lost money or anything, but I think this individual realized she got a pretty good deal because some of the other ones were selling a little bit more, only a little bit more than this or around this price, and then you needed to pay for shipping. So, but even I wasn't aware that that shipping was going to cost $20. So, lesson learned. The box itself, I believe, was 24 inches tall, and then it was 10 by 10. You know, it was a tall cube. So now I know. So keep that in mind as I deal with other larger items. I'm trying to pay much more attention to what that'll cost. The next item I sold was this. Actually, ironically enough, I didn't even not recognize this until I just started saying it out loud. These two pieces were bought in the same store, and they were sold right next to each other, one on October 31st and one on November 3rd. How funny. So this was a pair of carved wooden figures. They had their arms are joined at the shoulders, so they actually kind of just flailed about front and back. They were signed pieces, Wolf Creek, Beeman, Iowa, farmer and his wife. They were in very good condition. I had a little bit of patina to them, but it appeared that that patina was designed to be into them. I wasn't even 100% sure how old they were. There were some comps that these had sold previously, and they'd sold for decent amounts of money. But it was one of those cases that I wasn't 100% sure. They didn't sell often. So I ended up selling them for $39. So one of the more expensive items I've sold in my first month. And I had a total of $4 invested in them. They were $1.99 each. So for $4, again, shipping for these were very inexpensive because I wrapped them all into each individually and then paired them together so they fit in a box about the size of a shoebox, and sent those out. And she also wrote me a review and commented that she had purchased these as a gift for her neighbor, and so I thought that was kind of nice. So then the last item that I had sold on the November 4th, so right before the 1 month hit of my Etsy store, I sold this gorgeous mug, a mug that I almost considered purchasing for myself. It is a Holt Howard mug. It was stamped on the bottom, HH 1971, so it was dated. The graphics on it are absolutely beautiful. They're black and white, these sailing ships. It's a relatively tall mug. Some of my earlier posts, I wasn't putting the sizes. I've started doing better with that. This is a tall mug, though, and I should have taken a picture with it in my hand. But regardless, it did sell. It was sold again with free shipping, and it sold for, I think I lost my listing there. It sold for $22. It probably could have sold for more. There were a couple of comps that put it probably in the $20 range plus shipping. I just was struggling with the idea anyone would pay $25 or $30 for a mug. So I put it at $22, probably cost me $5 or $6 to ship it. So, and I had 99 cents into it. The mug cost me 99 cents. So a super great deal to close out my first month. And that was what sold on Etsy. So I will start doing these probably monthly, depending on how we do. So far, I'm not into my second month. If I want to do one for November, for the month of November, I have sold 15 items beyond this 8. So I don't think I'm going to get into these doing them weekly, but I might jump in and do them particularly until I get caught up in showing haul videos and things like that, so I can talk about some of these pieces and some of their histories, because I want these videos to be somewhat educational as well, because I'm learning a lot as I'm going through this, and some of it's super interesting, or at least I think it's interesting, and maybe you're finding it interesting as well. And if you've stayed 19 minutes into this video, then you must find it somewhat interesting. So that's it for what's sold on Etsy. So thank you very much for joining me. Again, my name is Patrick. I'm with Trusty Huckster Mercantile. You can find me on Etsy at TH Mercantile. I am also going to be found on Instagram and Facebook. If you could comment, like, and or subscribe to this video and channel, that would be great. I want to try and get established and see what I can do and see where this goes. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll talk to you again soon.